What's up, guys? Today we're going to be covering the easiest and hardest champions to play in League of Legends chosen by you. I asked thousands of you to choose up to 10 champions you all thought were both the easiest and hardest to play in the game in 2 separate surveys, so there's no denying the results. I'm going to start with listing the top 15 easiest champions and then list the top 15 hardest champions, and finally at the end I'm going to show you where every champion ranks from easiest to hardest. Also, if you could please consider subscribing, as not many of you watching are subbed, and because this video took forever to make, I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks, guys, and puppy. Let's go. Starting us off with the 15th easiest champion, we have Ashe. Ashe has kind of been the poster child for Riot's easiest champion to learn for years. I think the reason for this is because in almost every game out there, there's some kind of archer-like character. So the concept is already familiar for a lot of people. Still, while her kit is pretty simple, her playstyle is really not so easy. Her Q in itself can be a little tricky to get used to, but the hardest part with her is kiting. There's a big difference between good Ashe players and good Ashe players that can use their spacing and range really well. Other than that though, yeah, her spells and the concept of her champion are what make her so easy. Poke with her W, get vision with her E, and stun people with her ult. It's pretty easy to understand. Hey, you guys like free games and free stuff? Well, right now, Raid Shadow Legends is for a limited time giving away 4 free champions, and one of them is a legendary. Honestly, I get it. Starting a new game can kind of suck sometimes because you can feel behind, but this is actually a game changer. And that one legendary champion is already somebody you're kind of familiar with. He's literally a Giga Shad version of Wukong named Sun Wukong the Monkey King. I mean, look at this dude. He's crazy. So this is actually the perfect opportunity to try Raid because you will easily be smurfing in the early playthroughs. On top of that, Raid is loaded with a ton of other amazing champions, like they're even adding in new ones like the iconic 90s warrior Xena Warrior Princess. You can get her from the Champion Pass 2 and summon her from Ancient or Sacred Shards during the special summon boosts every week all the way up to January 19th. And a special thanks to Universal Studios licensing. Anyways, don't miss out on this insane opportunity and use my link or QR code to download Raid to get a crap ton of free stuff. If you're a new player, you'll get the legendary Sun Wukong by using promo code MONKEYKING. You'll get 2 epic heroes, Lightsworn, whose kit allows you to keep your team alive with defensive buffs and a revive, and Juliana, a boss killer from the Sacred Order who's insanely strong. And you'll get the rare champion War Maiden by using promo code RAIDWARMAIDEN. Plus, new and existing players can also get the rare champion Preserver and some other crazy bonuses by using the code ILOVERAID. Alright, thanks so much Raid for supporting the channel, and now back to the video. Next, in 14th place, we have Sona. Sona's abilities aren't just simple, but they also kind of tell you exactly what to do and how to use them. Q to do damage, W to heal, E for movement, and R for stun. Honestly, I think the trickiest part for her is maybe weaving in the power chords, but even that, you can just kind of mash buttons for a while. The one downfall she does have is no mobility, so if you get caught, you're kind of screwed, but other than that, she's pretty straightforward. In 13th place, we got Rammus. I'm not gonna lie, there's pretty much nothing difficult about this champion. Rammus is just nice because all you literally have to do is roll around and catch people. And then once you do, you can force people to kill themselves by attacking you. You just taunt with your E and then hit W and then you're set. It's quite the complicated combo. Even when it comes to his gameplay, his Q makes it really easy to gank people, so you don't really have to be precise with his pathing. I'm honestly kind of surprised he's not even lower on this list. In 12th place, we have Tryndamere. Tryndamere is pretty straightforward in the sense that he's melee and his whole entire kit basically revolves around just auto attacks. The hardest thing for him is knowing matchups since he has no range abilities, but as long as you can farm, you'll inevitably become a pain in the other team's ass. There's a reason that he's one of the only champions that people are able to complete a no damage game on. Plus, having the whole anti-dying button is pretty nice, as long as you remember to use it.
Gets outskilled here. There's the ult steal. Blue pops it early. I don't feel like the... I can read this. Oh, I'm trolling. 100%. That's what Perks said.
In 11th place, just 2 votes away from 10th, we have the Doggo Warwick. He's honestly one of those staple beginner junglers that is just easy. I'm not sure exactly how else to put it. His Q is good damage and lifesteal, W to run fast, E to CC, and an ult to look stupid when you whiff it. No, but seriously, he's just one of those non-flashy champions with no difficult combos. Alright, starting us off in the top 10, in 10th place, we have Malzahar. So for starters, obviously one of the reasons he's so easy to play is because his abilities are so simple. His Q is probably the hardest part of his kit because it's a skill shot, even though it's really not that hard to hit. And then after that, everything else is kind of impossible to screw up. His W spawns minions that will help him push and farm for you. His E is a point and click damage ability that when used on minions can also help farm for you. So real talk, if you're struggling to farm, you might want to try him out. Not to mention he has a spell shield passive which makes him a lot more forgivable to play when caught out. But let's be honest though, one of the things that really makes him one of the easiest champions to play is his ult. After all, when you have the 12th most broken ability in the game on a really easy champion to play, it kind of makes sense. By the way, I know it's the 12th most broken ability because I did a video earlier where I figured out the most broken abilities, so go check that out if you haven't seen it yet. Anyways, honestly, even his playstyle is pretty simple to understand. shove your minions, drop diseases on your opponents when you get the chance, and outplay them with your ultimate whenever it's up. You also scale really well into the late game too, so there's really no pressure during the laning phase either. Alright, in 9th place we have Miss Fortune. I still find it ironic that Ashe is kind of the poster child for easiest champion in the game, but I'm so glad that Miss Fortune is this high up on this list because I definitely agree. Out of all the ADCs and clearly most of the champions even, she is by far the easiest and simplest to play. She has a Q to do more damage, a W to go fast, and an E to make them not go fast. Also, a pretty simple ultimate that can solo win team fights. However, I think the biggest reason why Miss Fortune is so easy to play is due to the speed of her auto attacks. Miss Fortune relies more on damage in her build over speed, so it makes kiting with her so much easier. And kiting is not an easy thing to do for beginners or even experienced players. So having her build naturally be based around damage instead of attack is what I think really separates her from the others. So if you're trying to learn a new ADC, my recommendation, and clearly many others, is to try Miss Fortune first. Alright, in 8th place we have Dr. Mundo. For new players, this champion has a saying that goes, Mundo goes where he pleases, and I think that in itself sums up why this champion is so easy to play. This champion is so tanky that you can consistently walk through team fights, tank a million turret shots, and still come out full health in the end. And if that's not the definition of easy to play, I really don't know what is. He just has so much room to make mistakes and still do whatever he wants in the game. I mean, even his ultimate is just getting him back more health. Plus his passive is a freaking spell shield now. But I think the sleeper here that really makes Mundo so easy and safe is his Q. Having a low cooldown ranged ability in his kit that does a fair amount of damage is extremely helpful for a champion like Mundo because it gives him so much more versatility and it makes laning with him 10 times easier, especially versus ranged top laners. So right now, if you're actually struggling with dying too much or getting zoned from farming in lane, maybe give Mundo a try. Moving on, in 7th place, we have the sad mummy Amumu. Amumu is a non-flashy, very forgiving jungler to play while also having a ton of utility in his kit. He's one of those champions that you really don't need to be good at to play in the game because the concept of him is so simple. Walk up and stun them, cry on them, stun them again, and then stun them one more time because you can, all while not taking too much damage because you're a tank. And while you do have to hit your Q to stun them, you get 2 chances now. And even if you miss that second chance, you can just walk up to their face and all. So yeah, if you're looking for a champion to make the other team cry about not being able to move, Amumu is probably your guy. The 6th easiest champion with 714 votes goes to Lux. I'm not gonna lie, this was one of the only champions on this list I was actually shocked to see in the top 20. Now don't get me wrong, I don't really think Lux is complicated whatsoever and her abilities are pretty straightforward, but she does rely heavily on skill shots, seeing that every single one of her abilities are skill shots. And if you can't hit those, then you kinda have an issue. The other thing is that it does take some skill to be able to pull off good Lux combos. Not a lot, but some. With that said, failing to land a perfect combo isn't the end of the world as long as you're still hitting them. And a lot of her skill shots, like her E for instance, is pretty hard to miss. Not to mention, she has insane range where she can just sit back and chuck spells at a safe distance all day. Overall, she is still a very simple champion and easy to understand, so I believe that's why she comes up as the 6th easiest champion to play in the game. I wouldn't have personally put her over some of the others before her, but that's why the video is titled Chosen by You and not me. Alright, the 5th easiest champion in League goes to Annie. This is another pretty expected one on the list. Annie is probably, and I guess now you can almost say objectively, the most straightforward mid laner in the game to play. She has a non-skill shot Q that does huge damage, a wide ranged W to do damage, E to be fast and get a shield, and an ult to do massive damage while also summoning a bear to do damage for you. Now while her W and ult are technically skill shots, they might as well not be because they're kinda hard to miss. Also, for those who struggle to farm with just auto attacks, Annie also has a solution for that because you can just use her Q, which also restores mana on creep kills. The only real challenging part about this champion, I'd say, is learning her kill potential and playing around her stun, but after a game or two, you can pretty much nail the basics. Okay, next up, the 4th easiest champion spot goes to the rock solid Malphite. Alright, let's start off with the obvious things. Malphite, of course, has a very simple and strong kit, a non-skill shot Q where you do damage and chuck donuts at people, a W and E that deals damage while also giving huge defensive buffs, and of course he also just so happens to have one of the best ultimates in the game. Now in addition to his kit being extremely easy to use and understand, I think that what makes this particular champion so easy to play is the fact that there is so much room to mess up and still be useful. This of course goes for any tank out there, but Malphite especially because of his ultimate. His ult will always be useful in the game even if you're down 0 and 5, and that's definitely not always the case for every champion. There's a lot of champions out there that have a hard kit but easy playstyle, or easy kit and difficult playstyle, but Malphite has an extremely easy kit and a really easy playstyle. Just survive in lane as much as you can and ult people when it's up. So if you're looking for an easy forgivable top laner or even mid laner, Malphite's probably your guy. Okay, the bronze spot for the easiest champion to play in League with 981 votes goes to Master Yi. It's somewhat ironic that someone named Master Yi takes little to no mastering when it comes to learning this champion. And I think it goes without saying that a Q is a big reason on why he's as simple as he is. Alpha Strike is notorious for being a brain dead ability that smacks the crap out of people. And in order to pull off this insane mechanic that does a ridiculous amount of damage, all you have to do is press Q. And then as far as the rest of his kit goes, his other spells aren't exactly challenging either. He has a W that just heals, an E that is essentially a do more damage faster button, and then an R to go fast. Now with all that said, I will admit that there are a few things that separate a good Master Yi player from a great one, such as using your Alpha Strike at the optimal times or setting yourself up correctly so that you're able to snowball into the late game. But the differences are pretty minuscule compared to a lot of other champions. So if you're looking for an easy jungler to play that has the potential to ruin the other team's lives, Master Yi is the one. Alright, the second easiest champion to play in the game by a significant margin is the one and only Yuumi. Yuumi raked in 1,317 votes. That is a difference of 336 votes from third to second place. Anyways, even though Yuumi is voted the second easiest champion to play, she's probably still the most memed easiest champion for the sole reason that, well, you don't have to click half the time to play her. Instead, you mostly just hop on for the ride and heal and poke every so often. Now, even through all that, I can honestly see why Yuumi is ranked as the slightly more difficult champion to play than our #1 pick. And that's because to some extent, there is some skill that's involved in playing her. It even hurts to say that out loud, but it's kind of true. Knowing when to jump on and off champions and who to jump on during team fights is a big part of playing her correctly, which a surprising amount of people don't actually do. So in that aspect, I get it. But in all other aspects, Yuumi is by far one of the easiest champions to play, hands down. No pun intended. You get it because you don't need hands to actually play. Okay. And finally, you've probably figured it out by now, but the easiest champion to play in League of Legends with 1,429 votes goes to the one and only Demacian Garen. This really was a two-way race between Yuumi and Garen, and honestly, I think most people who play League already kind of knew it was going to come down to these two. That said, Garen has kind of always been seen as one of the simplest and most straightforward champions ever since his release back in 2010. Similar to Ashe, almost every single game has a staple warrior type character, and Garen is that guy for League. His kit is extremely easy to understand because all of his abilities are actually simple and not too overcomplicated, something we're just not used to these days. He's got a Q ability that gives movement speed and does big damage, a W that makes him take less damage, an E that comes with its own slogan because it's so simple to use, and an ult that is a point and click and does a ridiculous amount of damage. Not to mention his passive is just healing himself, so even if you do mess up in lane a bit, you can always just heal back up. So if you really are a new player watching this trying to figure out which champion to try for the first time, Garen is probably the best choice. Garen is definitely worthy of the easiest champion title, unless you're one of the 10 lost causes from the other survey who voted for him as the hardest champion, then I guess he's not. All right, those are the easiest champions in League of Legends chosen by you, and now it's time to get into the hardest to play champions. But really quick, make sure to go vote for the next chosen by you episode in the description where we're trying to figure out which champion has the best lore. This was actually one of your guys' ideas, so if you have an idea for a future episode, let me know in the comments too. All right, now let's jump into the hardest champions in League, and a quick disclaimer, this poll was taken before Hue was released, so yeah. All right, starting things off, the 15th hardest champion in League goes to Zoe. Zoe's interesting because mechanically she's really not that hard. Like, you'll still have to go into practice tool and practice her combos, but after a few games you'll be fine. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not a cakewalk implementing those things into her laning phase in gameplay, especially when you include all the random summoner spells that can appear out of nowhere, but also you can definitely get the hang of things in a fairly short amount of time. The biggest thing with her is getting down positioning. Finding the right angles and lines is essential to being a good Zoe player. It's really those huge picks and burst damage that can help win you games. Next in 14th place is Draven. Let's be honest, the only thing pushing him as the hardest champion to play is having to catch his axes, which by no means is an easy thing to do, but besides that, the rest of his kit is actually pretty simple. W for speed, E for CC, and then R for global range damage. Still, catching axes is also pretty much the majority of this champion's playstyle, so if you suck at that, then you suck at Draven. Also, ADC is already probably one of the hardest roles mechanically just because you have to keep track of so many things happening at once, but then when you add an entire other minigame to play while that's all taking place, things get hard. And not just hard, but for someone starting off, it almost seems near impossible. Now he'll of course drop his axe in the direction you're clicking, but no matter what, it's incredibly difficult to get used to. And it takes a ton of games to make it second nature, which is essential as an ADC. But if you can do it, he's an extremely strong champion with a ton of carry potential. Alright, in 13th place is Katarina. Honestly, I thought Katarina was at least going to be in the top 10, so this is a bit surprising, but here we are. Mechanics wise, as we all know, she is hard. Probably one of the hardest out there. On mechanics alone, I definitely say she's in the top 10. If anything, she's definitely one of the flashiest champions. The main issues with Katarina are, one, her early game is trash, so it's really hard starting off getting past that early game bump without getting smacked and losing too much motivation. You really have to learn how to play around her cooldowns and play from behind. And two, she's so easily countered with CC that you really have to know the right times to make a move. Katarina is notorious for making huge pentakill plays, but there's a lot more thought that goes into those highlights than just hitting R. I think a lot of people realize that too when starting off playing her, after they try an ult for the first time, only to instantly get knocked out of it. She's not the hardest out there, but definitely tricky to play. Alright, in 12th place, we have Akali. So honestly, I don't think Akali is that difficult. I think she's hard, but I don't know if she's top 12 hard. Clearly 469 people do though, so I won't deny it. Still, I will say initially she can be a little tricky to understand. Her autos are absolutely trash. Like, that's something people aren't used to, and farming on Akali is a whole nother skill that you have to learn in itself. But if you do take some time to learn her combos and even her most basic ones, then after a few games, most people will probably be set. You then of course need to limit test a bit and see her potential, but once you've got the combos down, her overall playstyle is pretty simple. Make the squishies cry and snowball the crap out of the game. In 11th place, we have everyone's favorite wind boy, Yasuo. People might kill me for saying this, but I feel like Yasuo is actually one of the most underrated difficult champions to play. There's so many people out there who call him a brain dead champion, but in reality, he actually takes a lot of skill to play. And no, I do not play this champion. Knowing when to use your wind wall, knowing how to dash, and being able to hit your Qs and combos is not as easy as people think. Now that said, I do still think he can be crazy strong even in the hands of someone less experienced, but Yasuo's skill cap is way higher than people give him credit for. It really is easy to learn because his kit isn't that hard to understand, but he's extremely hard to master. Alright, finally we've got the top 10, and in 10th place is Nidalee. I really thought she'd be a bit higher, but I can see both sides. Nidalee's interesting because her kit is objectively challenging, since after all she's one of the few shapeshifter champions out there, and now suddenly instead of just 4 abilities you're dealing with 2 times the abilities. But at the same time, it's really not that difficult to get down. I think anyone with a few practice games could nail the basics of her kit, as long as you can hit her spears. I think the real challenging part with her comes with game knowledge and knowing how to play her, since she is such a heavy early game champion. She is easily one of the top, if not the top early game snowball champion in the game, which also means if you don't know how to punish people early, you're kind of This is why I am always terrified whenever I see a Nidalee player in my ranked games, because any Nidalee player below Emerald is probably dog. No offense. Alright, in 9th place, we have Aurelia. Now I can speak from firsthand experience on this one, as I have played her a fair amount by now, and I still remember how much of a pain in the ass it was starting off learning her. It took me so many games for this champion to click, and I think one of the reasons because of that is when starting off, there are just so many things you have to think about. For starters, combos are a bit tricky. I don't think that they're the hardest, but they're still challenging enough that you have to practice a lot. Other things you need to learn are smaller things, like will that minion die from your Q if you dash to it? But the smaller things end up turning into big things, because if you lose your Q reset mid-fight, you'll kind of get screwed. Then there's the whole deciding what fights you can take, and finally the biggest part is just dashing. Now I know a lot of people see Aurelia players and think it's brain dead, but when you're first starting out, thinking about which minion to jump to is exhausting. It gets a lot easier as you go on, but sometimes it's still hard for people who even played this champion for a long time. It's like playing a minigame, and in that minigame you need to figure out the best path in the maze to achieving your goals. She's pretty fun and rewarding if you do put some effort into her though, but by no means is she an easy champion to play. In 8th place, we have Quinoa. Qiyana is just a really weird champion to play because of the way she has to use the map as a part of her kit. It's just different enough from other champions that it takes a bit longer to understand how she works and how to properly use her. It also takes time to know when to use which element in each situation. Her combos also aren't just something that you can pull off on her first try. She also has a ton of potential in her kit to outplay her opponent, so in that sense, her skill level is kind of uncapped. You don't see a lot of amazing Qiyana players out there for a reason, but when you do, it's pretty terrifying. Alright, moving on, in 7th place, we have Kalista. Kalista's not someone that instantly comes to mind to me as being the hardest, so I found this particularly interesting, but I can see why she's up here. For starters, her movement is substantially different from any other ADC. Getting used to her kiting effect is hard enough in itself. Her E ability is also pretty tricky because it can just be hard to judge the damage it will do, which is just something you have to learn over time from playing her. She is also one of the only champions whose ultimate heavily relies on someone else, so communication is a big part of playing her too. Plus, having that control over someone else's champion is a big responsibility and something that can be easily f***ed up, so it takes time to recognize the best situations to use it. Alright, in 6th place with 596 votes, we have Zed. So obviously Zed's on here because of his abilities, but I think he's kind of a funny one because in my opinion, he looks a lot flashier than he actually is. And I'll probably get a lot of hate for saying that, but in my defense, a lot of low elo players actually have pretty good mechanics on them these days. Like if you go into gold matches today, you'll probably find decent Zed players there. Now they're of course not going to be on the same level as a challenger player, but they're still going to be good enough that people can still make some pretty insane plays. With that said, Zed specifically is more than just flashing around everywhere. There's also a lot of thought that goes into him as well. Knowing when to jump where and if you should use shadow is a big part of his playstyle, so mastering that aspect of him can be challenging enough. Mechanics wise, he's still definitely not a champion anyone can just pick up and have a good time on him with. It still takes a ton of time and practice to effortlessly pull off his combos. Alright, down to the top 5. The 5th hardest champion in League goes to, of course, Riven. Riven is one of those champions that has not only been around since the dawn of League, but also one of the few champions to make it this far without being significantly reworked. Like sure, she's had a few changes over the years, but the overall concept of her has remained relatively the same. Nevertheless, her kit is the reason she's in the top 5, specifically because of how many micro movements and combos you need to learn to be good on her. Not even just be good on her, but these days just to be relative. The thing with her is that even the most basic essential skills take a lot of time and effort to learn. You'll see a lot of low elo Riven players out there, but it's truly nothing compared to players that have actually mastered the champion. For instance, one of the basic things you have to learn to be good at her is fast queuing. In other words, clicking back and forth from your target and the ground while queuing in order to get off more damage at a time. Now, a lot of lower elo players still play Riven and don't do that, and some of you might think they get away with it, but once you start playing higher and better players, and I'm not even talking that high, like I'm talking gold or plat, then you'll start to notice Riven become noticeably weaker than other champions, not necessarily because she's a weak champion, but entirely because you haven't mastered the basics and fundamentals. She's kind of a do or die champion in that sense. There's unfortunately just so many things and combos that you need to memorize in order to be effective on her, which also means that there's just a lot more room for error. And when you're fighting champions in the top lane like Garen or Tryndamere who literally just auto you, it can be hard to keep up. Funny enough, the Riven fast Q combo wasn't actually something meant to be in the game, but it was actually a bug a long time ago that over the years Riot just kept in because they thought it was a cool concept. But nowadays, it's like the bare minimum if you want to play this champion. The other thing is you can 100% blame the sweaty high elo one-trick Riven players for her being so weak and low elo, because thanks to those players, Riot is forced to weaken her or else those one-tricks would just run over everyone. Which means lower elo players are either forced to learn the mechanics or just suffer with a bad champion. Or just change champions entirely, which is usually what happens. Alright, the 4th hardest champion in League goes to Gangplank. Yeah, I think this is another one of those given difficult champions. Gangplank easily has one of the most unique playstyles in the game thanks to his barrels. And it's that unique playstyle that also makes him so difficult to learn. With most champions, it's pretty self-explanatory on how you're supposed to do damage, auto attack, cast spells, etc. But with him, you have to hit barrels. And in order to do that, you have to 1, understand how they work and how the timing works, and 2, you actually have to learn the mechanics to chain your barrels in the correct situations. There's some easy combos out there that you can learn, like the 1-2 barrel combo, which again isn't that difficult, but that's literally just one out of a ton of other combos you can use with him. And if you don't learn a lot of these combos, you lose a lot of his potential. And these combos are not easy. In fact, I personally think the barrel combos are one of the hardest to learn and pull off consistently in the game. And then once you learn all the combos, you also have to know which combo is best to use in each situation. Not to mention how to utilize the rest of his kit as well. Either way, he's definitely deserving to be at least number 4 on this list. Okay, the bronze spot for the hardest champion to play with 720 votes goes to the blind monk Lee Sin. Lee Sin just managed to squeeze this spot from Gangplank by just 5 votes. Anyways, I think most people already know why he's rated so high though. Ever since the player Insect back in 2013 pulled off the very first Insect kick, it kind of opened up a brand new world of what this champion is truly capable of in the right hands. I mean, sure, anyone can play Lee Sin, and even bronze and silver players can still hit Qs and take Qs for damage. But few people can actually become playmakers on this champion and use his combos to make game-changing plays for their team. The difference between okay Lee Sin players and good Lee Sin players is actually night and day. And it straight up just takes an insane amount of time and practice to become consistent with it. And sometimes it's not even just about knowing the mechanics of Lee Sin specifically, but also knowing how his kit can affect the rest of the game. One of Owner's plays at this last World was a perfect example of this. In T1's game versus Weibo Gaming, after Tom ate Senna, he waited for the perfect moment to ult Tom right as he let her out so both of them would get hit. I mean, just thinking of that is pretty insane.
Nature's Grasp flying forward. Owner still has that GA. Remember, Chris going down so incredibly low. Zeus just executes the shy off to the side, and there is a
Alright, the runner-up spot for the hardest champion to play with 1,003 votes goes to Azir. Alright, first off, holy crap, that's a big jump from second to third. 283 votes separated the two. Anyways, the Emperor of Shurima has notoriously been one of the most difficult to play ever since his release because of the mechanics it takes to play him is just so freaking ridiculous. The abilities themselves are actually fairly easy to understand, like his Q charges his soldiers, W summons soldiers, and E guides them to his soldiers. But it is the ridiculous amount of combinations you can use in so many given situations with those abilities that makes him so tricky to play. It takes hundreds of games and hundreds of hours to fully understand where you should be in each fight and what you should do in each fight, and which combos to use at what time. And then performing the actual combos themselves isn't exactly a walk in the park either. I've seen so many Azir players see the open window and opportunity but just completely whiff a combo. Aside from all that, he's also heavily reliant on making it towards the late game, so if you aren't able to stay relevant during the early and mid game, then you're just going to become useless anyways. Another testament to how hard this champion is actually his current playstats and win rate. You see, because of Worlds and so many people playing him there like Faker, his pick rate skyrocketed, but since it's mostly full of people trying to be like Faker, his win rate plummeted since no one actually knows how to play him. You can see the huge spike of popularity on the graph, and as far as win rate goes, within last patch alone, he dropped 2% and is now down to a 45% win rate. That is what we like to call the Worlds effect. Truly worthy of the number 2 spot. And finally, in the number 1 spot with 1,135 votes, the hardest champion in League of Legends goes to Aphelios. I'm sure most people are not surprised by this at all because, Jesus, this dude is ridiculous. I still remember watching his champion spotlight for the first time and instantly knowing that I am never going to fully understand how to play him. I mean, when your Q ability, the one that's supposed to be the simplest and most basic ability in your kit, turns into being a billion different abilities and weapons at the same time, it just doesn't make sense anymore. I think he's one of the few champions even pro players and casters still struggle to fully understand too. The biggest thing for him and the reason he screws with so many people is that he's just so different from any other champion that no one really knows what to do with him at first. Any other champion, when you start off playing them for the first time, you know they'll have a Q ability that does some form of damage probably. Don't know they'll have a W and an E and an ultimate ability. But with Aphelios, you're stuck trying to figure out how 5 different abilities and weapons can fit in his Q alone, and then you're trying to figure out why he doesn't have an E in the first place, and then you're wondering why the you have the choice to level up his passive of a passive, and then you're wondering why there's even a passive of passive to begin with. I will say, after a while and after looking into it, you can start to slowly understand this champion a bit more. For example, Q lets you use different weapons and abilities, and W lets you swap weapons. Seems simple enough. But then once you're past that, you realize that there is so much more you need to learn, like weird passives, different ult interactions, understanding patterns, needing to know which weapons to use and when, and at that point, things just get overwhelming. Aphelios really is a very strong champion, and if you're willing to put in the hours, he can be a fun champion to pick up. But he's so hard that unless you throw down a solid chunk of games, like easily hundreds, you're gonna be straight up useless on this guy. Plus, it's just mind f***ery when you're out there fighting for your life, cutting back and forth, trying to figure out which weapon to pull out, and then someone like Garen comes along and just spins on you for a bit and then presses R. Feels great. Needless to say, Aphelios truly is the hardest champion in League of Legends. Alright, there you have it. Those are the easiest and hardest champions in the game, chosen by you. Also, don't leave quite yet because things aren't exactly over with this video. You see, between the data from the easiest and hardest surveys, I had a unique opportunity here to create a fairly accurate list of every single champion from easiest all the way to hardest. The way it worked is I subtracted the amount of votes received from the easiest to play survey from the hardest to play survey, and then used the total number to determine where they ranked on the easiest to hardest spectrum. In other words, since Garen received 1,429 votes for the easiest champion to play, but also received 10 votes for the hardest champion, his total would be 1,419 on the final chart. And the higher the vote, the easier the champion is. Something kind of interesting is that a few of the champions ranking in the top 15 did actually change around a bit, so keep an eye out for that. And if none of this makes sense, don't worry, it will in a bit. Nevertheless, here it is, and if you could please consider subscribing, I would greatly appreciate it. Alright, let's go.